We'll get to Obamacare in a moment, but first, it's fair to say that pretty important to a whole lot of CD2 residents are Social Security and Medicare. What sort of changes, if any, would you back in either of those systems, and should any of it be privatized? Ann, you have 1 minute.
I fight to support and keep Medicare and Social Security. I'm very concerned about the new budget that was just passed by Congress that raises the deficit, because I believe they're playing the long game to eventually make cuts to Medicare and Social Security. And folks, that is why it is so important that we take back this seat, because the path to taking back the majority of the House of Representatives runs right through CD2. And that's why this race is so important. Those are programs that people rely on, that they've paid into. They are not entitlements. They earn them. They're earned benefits. And we have to fight for that. I promise you that I will. I'm having the head of the committee to protect Social Security and Medicare come and do a town hall in Tucson in about a week, and we'll let you know. We'd love to have you there, because he's an expert and this is such an important issue.
I know that Medicare is something that works for us, and it's been working for us since 1966. I also know that another single-payer system, TRICARE, which the military and military retired use, has been working for decades. So this issue of Medicare and having Medicare for all, which is what I believe in, is not that hard. It's already working. The number is already out there. All we have to do is copy something that's already working. And so I certainly think that Medicare for all is a way to go. I also think it's something that we can legislate. We've already have a model. Social Security, we need to make it whole. We need to lift the income cap on Social Security. The top 1% or the top people over $200,000 are not paying their share. Social Security, the burden is being carried by the low-income folks, and that is not fair. Lift the cap on Social Security.
No, I agree with a lot of this as well, and we do have to make Medicare, Social Security more robust and protect it. There's ways to do it, and Mary just mentioned one of them. These programs, actually, a lot of people wouldn't know this from sometimes the media coverage that they get, but two of the most efficient and effective programs in the entire federal government. One of the lowest costs in terms of the administrative costs for Medicare, for example. So, and from the medical perspective, my patients love it. I've never heard a single patient say, "I'm done, I'm ripping up my Medicare card." That's not going to happen. And so let's build on successes. Let's not tear it down. Let's make sure that we keep the Medicare Trust Fund solvent and extend its life. Which, by the way, as I was implementing the Affordable Care Act, month after month during those 2 years, many of them in DC, we could see the lifespan of the Medicare Trust Fund get longer and longer and longer, thanks to some of the work that we did on the ACA. So, and my time.
Well, I enjoy both myself, so please don't change it. You know, the 1%, people don't know this. You don't have to take it, by the way. When you get it, you can turn it down if you're in 1%. So don't feel like you have to take it because of us, because a lot of other people really need it in this country. You would get from what I propose, Medicare for all, I believe, what Mary and Matt say and everyone else. We have a program in place. It's working. Keep it. But I would do one thing differently, I must tell you. I would have a tiered level for Medicare for all that would change the benefits as we progress through life. that would all be done on the computer. You would get it when you were born, like you would get a Social Security card. And remember this, folks, I don't know where the Republicans get this from. It's not a gift from the government, excuse me. We all worked to get it. We need to remind them it's ours, it belongs to us. So I'm Medicare for all, and I will fight every bit I can when I get started.
Certainly one that is continuing to be a political hot potato is how to deal with the rest of our healthcare system, including repealing or shoring up the Affordable Care Act. How do we make sure people have affordable access to quality healthcare? Do we do single payer? Do we expand Medicaid? Matt Hines, you worked a bit on the rollout of Obamacare, which went quite well for some people, not so great for others. We won't talk about that website today.
I didn't do the website. I wasn't.
So, what's your take on the rest of our healthcare system? And again, you have 1 minute.
No, it's fine. I'm kidding. We have a lot of work to do, which is another reason to think it's so important to send folks that have firsthand experience, nurses, firefighters, physicians. Very few actually are in the Congress right now. 2 Democratic physicians, about a dozen Republican physicians, because I'm not sure what they consider themselves hearing what they say. But look, having spent 2 years working in the trenches, implementing the Affordable Care Act, familiarizing myself with Health and Human Services, I'm best equipped to be able to suggest and implement ways to help it out. A public option, robustly funded and supported and administered through Medicare would be one way to do it. Allowing an early buy-in to Medicare would be fantastic, another option we could look at on our way to get to that Medicare for all point. And the Affordable Care Act, again, helping to reduce premiums in rural areas, especially like Cochise County, where competition is low and the premiums are so high it's unaffordable even though it's called the Affordable Care Act. So these are some of the things I will want to work on.
Thanks. As Ann mentioned, the deficit, the tax plan that was just passed, the budget that was just passed, has a $1.5 trillion deficit lined into it. So what that means is that we are seeing cynicism at its worst. Either you have hypocrites who have been talking about the way they did for 7 years, repeal and replace, who have been talking ideologically forever of a balanced budget, not having a deficit. And here they created, controlling the entire mechanism of government at all levels, a $1.5 trillion deficit. So what does that mean? It's either hypocrisy and or it's a way to go after Medicare and Social Security. I think it's both. And I think that's the threat that's facing us right now. They are after this. They have been after Social Security since 1933, Medicare since 1966. They just don't give up. They started chipping away at Medicare under President Reagan in 1981-82. And so they took what was a huge surplus in Medicare to balance the military budget that Reagan had, which was a deficit. We still have 27 million Americans uninsured, even under the ACA. I love and supported Barack Obama, but he cowed to Max Baucus at a time that the Democrats had 60 members in the Senate. When Max Baucus said, "I'm taking single payer off the table," we should have had some courage to say, oh no, even if you don't have the votes, let's have the discussion, let's have the debate, a national debate the way we should on gun control. I know we did. So we've got something better, but we're not there yet. And so 2 years ago, I was the first member in the legislature on the floor of the House to say, we need Medicare for all, everyone. It's a right, it's a universal right, it's a health right, from birth to death. And yes, we know somebody, all of us, is taking advantage of Medicare. It's good, it's efficient, it works. And they keep chipping away at it. Even in the last several years, they still want to chip away at it. This is cynicism and hypocrisy to take it away from us completely and do something privatized that they don't even know what they're talking about. As Democrats should have been pointing to that last year when they said 7 years of repeal, replace, and they couldn't do anything. Democrats should have said in that better deal, look at them, and by the way, this is what we stand for. I am telling you that I stand for Medicare for all, or a single payer, or a universal health care system that takes those 27 million members today, citizens, that don't have health care and giving it to everybody.
You know, from day one, if you look at the pathway to where we got to Obamacare, that wasn't overnight. That took decades to get done. Those were things that have been started since 1930. We have, as progressives, have always tried to push a universal healthcare system, and it's never gotten through. That, on the other side, they've always been opposed to it, and we should know that. This isn't a small fight for just Medicare for all, and it's not a temporary thing. This is a fight into the future, and Obamacare was the first foundation that we should establish Medicare for all under. But we only do that by taking small steps. None of us are going to get into office and turn the lights on tomorrow and say, Medicare for all, done, I'm going home, throw me a party, I'm not Martha McSally. And that, we should know that going in. It's a decades-long fight to get to where we are. I do agree with Matt, and I do agree with Mary as well. We need to make sure that we fully support Social Security and Medicare, but we also need to take the small steps, like a public option, into a Medicare for all system. Things that can actually get through, and not just the small Democratic sound bites that we all talk about. We need to really do thoughtful discussion on what our healthcare system looks like. And we have to look at student loan debts for those doctors as well. When you're getting outside of school and you have $150,000, what do you think is inflating these healthcare costs? It's that system of privatized healthcare that's really pushing a lot of these costs. That's also what we need to address.
Mary, what's your take?
Obamacare, I was in Washington, D.C. Working at the Pentagon when Obamacare passed, and it was a really, really great day. I mean, it was one of those pieces of legislation like Social Security and Medicare that was a groundbreaker. It was moving us forward. It gave 23 million people health care. Preventative health care. It put insurance companies on notice in terms of taking care of people. Unfortunately, what happened just very, very recently with the tax fiasco that Trump just passed is the individual mandate was taken out. In my opinion, that has put ACA at huge risk. So for our first step is we need to bring that individual mandate back. We need to make sure that ACA can survive, and this is a way it's going to survive. Thank you.
I don't support single payer, and I don't support Medicare for all, because I've not seen a plan about how you pay for that. When we passed the Affordable Care Act, we made sure it was paid for. 140 million people in this country get their health insurance from their employers. Now we just gave corporations a massive tax cut. We want to take away the requirement that they pay for their employees' health care? I don't. Now the Affordable Care Act is not perfect, and in counties where we only have one insurer, I have a solution. I believe that anybody should be able to buy into Medicare. Buying in pays for it, and it gives people a reasonable choice, especially in those places where they lack insurance, healthcare companies to give them a choice. And so I want to be clear about that with you, because there's a lot of talk about that, but having gone through the Affordable Care debate, it is very complex.
Time for a lightning round. I'm going to ask you some very quick questions, and rather than take a long time to talk about it, if you're answering yes to the question, just raise your hand up high. Will you support Nancy Pelosi as Speaker of the House? Is it your assessment that climate change is taking place and that human actions are playing a large role in it? Do you favor a carbon fee or cap and trade type system to deal with that? All right, you want to break it up? Do you favor a carbon fee? Do you favor cap and trade? Should the federal government fund more renewable energy projects? Should Democrats trade funding for a border wall to get a firm deal on DACA? Should Congress waive environmental laws and the Freedom of Information Act for the Border Patrol to make it easier to build that wall? Should the Rosemont mine be built? And somewhat related, would you become a co-sponsor of Representative Grijalva's Save Oak Flat Act? That leads me to a brief follow-up with you raising your hand on that. And isn't that a bit of a change from your stance when you were in Congress and worked for that land swap?
Not at all. Let me tell you, that bill was a Republican bill sponsored by Paul Gosar and John McCain. It was stripped of any environmental compliance and stripped of any negotiations or consultations with the tribes. I spent years meeting with the tribes, meeting with the stakeholders on that legislation. We were able to make sure that all environmental compliance was in the law. We were able to make sure that Apache Leap, the sacred site, was protected in permanent protection. And we were able to also create thousands of jobs in that area and trade for very environmentally sensitive land that was not being protected. And so that would not have happened if John McCain and Paul Gosar had been able to do it on their own. And included in that is the environmental assessments under Oak Flats, and that's happening right now. And the company has to make those reports, the government has to make those reports public and hold public hearings. And under the environmental laws, there has to be some kind of amelioration of any damage that would happen.
Certainly one of perennial debate in CD2. What does comprehensive immigration reform mean? What specific additional border security measures do you advocate or oppose? And what should be done about the Dreamers? Billy Kovacs, you have 90 seconds.
Yeah, find them first. I think as Democrats, we don't ask enough when we stand up here. We go for what's okay or what can get passed. We need to ask for more. I was the first one to come out for legalizing all 11.2 million. And I understand if you're not clapping, look at yourselves and where our families came from. We are not the only immigrants that came to these shores. The first people are Native American people. We are second. And when I look at immigration, I don't agree with Trump's fiscal year 2018 budget where he increased to the tune of $42 billion for border costs. We don't need those kind of things. We don't need the things like Operation Stone Garden, where we're using our forces in the county to put on top of their funding an additional 1.3 or $3.2 million. Those are things that we shouldn't do. That's what I stand for. What I stand against is the fact that out of all that budget increase, the one thing that they zeroed out was grants for citizenship. That's not our country. If you don't have a pathway to citizenship for 11.2 million people that are hard-working individuals that provide economic relief for our small communities, or has anybody gone and picked something in a field? I have. It's not fun. Are you going to do it? They come to this country for a better life, and that life starts in small town America, and that's what we need to support. So I absolutely support a few common sense measures. One of those is not increasing any money to Border Patrol because our populations of immigrants have gone down, so that's a falsity. Two, no money from Democrats, and we should have stuck to what we were going to do, and is not give any leeway into the DACA discussion, and made sure that 800,000 kids had a role in the country. That's what we did. And last thing, I know I'm over my time. Everything that I have said, I have stood for and I've taken a pledge for. So if I'm elected, I'll stand by that, and I won't be kowtowed into something else that I don't agree with. So thank you.
What is the rural take on these issues?
Well, it's one I disagree with. On our ranch, we were 12 miles from the border. I never one time, my partner and I never one time saw anybody on our ranch that I would have feared. Had they come to my ranch, I would have made them dinner and given them water. When has it become, ladies and gentlemen, when has it become a crime in America to want to work? I want to read you something. I support DACA. They need a path to citizenship. That should happen as soon as possible. But I want to read you something in case you've forgotten this, because my relatives did not forget it. They saw it at Ellis Island when they came here. It says, "Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses, yearning to breathe free the wretched refuse of your teeming shore. Send these, the homeless, tempest-tossed, to me, America. I lift my lamp behind the golden door." This is everything we've ever been, people. You all came from somewhere else at some time. Don't forget it. Don't forget it.
Immigration reform is something that's very, very close to me. I have relatives who this generation in their lifetime have immigrated from Mexico. They are not criminal and they're not rapists. If there's one thing that insulted me, that Trump did, I mean, there were many, many things, but when he said many things, but when he said that criminal and rapists are coming across the border, that was so wrong, that was so insulting, and that was so degrading to so many people that have contributed so much to this country, to include my relatives. The immigration reform is definitely fear-based. People are afraid of people who are different from them. We've got to stop that. Diversity, being different, is a good thing. It brings creativity. It brings a richness to our country. It has in the past, and it's still happening now. So these fear-based policies are terrible. What do we need to do? We need to have, comprehensive immigration reform, and more than anything, we have to protect our dreamers. We have to protect our DACA. They have earned the right to stay here. They are good citizens. And so the bottom line is, and we don't want to break up families. That's so important. So what do we need to do? So maybe something as reasonable of extending time limits to get into a path to citizenship. It takes time. There's complexities. It's a broken system. Let's give people more time to be able to work through that broken system. Let's extend visas. They are deserving of their role in this country. They have put skin in the game in this country, and we need to respect them.
I was born and raised in South America. Born in Venezuela, spent my first 18 years there. Came here to work for a senator in Washington and then Arizona to graduate from the university. My mother was Colombian, my father American. When they met, they hardly spoke each other's language, and they lived 65 years. I had an abuelita, and I learned English in the first grade. So I have a personal background of respecting borders in two senses. One, we must provide for the security of our citizens. But if we're going to talk about security of our citizens, what is the greater threat? People coming across the border looking for work, or cyber theft? People going after our secrets, our voting lists, our very security. When we talk about this, it's like talking about cars that that in the buggy age, when there were horse-drawn carriages instead of cars, we're talking about a wall that doesn't work, that's expensive, that's an old system that doesn't address our security and the legal immigration of people that we want to come here and work and make a living and have a brighter future. Instead of a wall, we ought to be addressing cybersecurity threats to our military, to our industry, to our economy, to our voting rights, to ensuring that your vote is actually your vote and not someone else's. So of course I support the Dreamers. And I think that, you know, this talk of deporting people as this president did as a candidate, deporting 12 million people is just not going to happen. We'd have to have a fascist authoritarian government to go round up 12 million people and do it. So let's talk some sensible border issues that address our economy, trade, not a NAFTA, but a corrected NAFTA, where Arizona is benefiting today as the greatest economic trade partner we have is Mexico. Why would we want to jeopardize that by creating this antagonism and this division? I spoke about unity a minute ago. Let's keep talking about unity and not falling for the divisive tactics that are represented symbolically and realistically by something as obnoxious as a border wall.
I do not support building a wall. 30% of the economy in southern Arizona comes from Mexico. We have to have comprehensive immigration reform. And I will tell you, as a former prosecutor, I have zero tolerance for criminals and cartels. But if we pass comprehensive immigration reform that would allow a legal entry into this country, then our border patrol could focus on the criminals. People always ask, when is the border safe? And I said, the border is only safe and secure when the people, the ranchers, who live along the border, feel it's safe and secure. I hear these stories of people who are afraid on their ranches when they see these drug smugglers coming through. And the only way we can stop that is to provide a legal pathway for those who want to come here to work, to visit their family, to shop, and then we focus on the criminal elements. I sponsored legislation that would allow Dreamers to work on Capitol Hill because I believe, and still do, that if members of Congress can hear their stories, their tragic stories about ripping families apart, we would pass comprehensive immigration reform.
You know, this is kind of all, well, not all, but a lot of this has actually been caused by Donald Trump, right? I mean, the Dreamers were they had a system in place, things were stable as we were working on a solution. And then out the window that went, right? So it's really your vote. Don't let anyone tell you your vote doesn't matter. And on immigration especially, we're already seeing people getting deported that should not be getting deported. Folks that don't know other languages, they're being hunted down by ICE. That is because from the very top, except as pertains to Melania and her parents, because that's apparently okay. But you know, unless it's his own family involved, this is a problem. Someone who's been here for decades, who again primarily knows English and is a professor or is a business owner. These are the people, not just the criminal element. Donald Trump and ICE under Donald Trump are focusing on rounding up people right now who should not be deported. So this is a huge issue. And yes, comprehensive immigration reform, there's a lot there. Respecting the economy in southern Arizona, focusing on criminal elements. That is human trafficking, which is just horrible. That's guns, right? Guns going south, money coming north across the border. These are the kinds of things we focus on, not on families trying to make a better life. So that's the way I'm going to approach this, from a place of compassion.